Good afternoon, everybody. Dobry dzień. Buongiorno. Bonjour. I dzień dobry Państwu. It is great pleasure to welcome you at our final conference meeting of our Unread project, Urban Regulations and Political Memory towards Understanding Special Temporal Aspects of Urban Development. And let me remind that my name is Karolina Wojciechowska, and I'm the coordinator of this Unread course. I would like to thank you, double, as you hear, for coming to Warsaw and also for connecting via Zoom with us. And when it comes to our remote participants, Maciej will send a link to them with the view from our audience via YouTube. Let me now pass over to Piotr Grzebek, Associate Professor of Faculty of Law and Administration at University of Warsaw, our Dean for Research and International Cooperation, with a request to open the conference. Piotr, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Karolina. Good afternoon to everyone. It's my particular pleasure to open this conference, Urban Regulations and Political Memory. Since Karolina, she kept me in the loop, so I constantly got the feedback about the project, and based also on all the materials she shared with me, I can officially declare that this project is a great success of all the participants. I'm really proud of the main coordinator, my colleague from the Faculty of Law, and also based on our short conversation with other colleagues, I think that all of them are already satisfied and happy that they are on board in this project. From institutional perspective, I'd like to point out a couple of things that are of great importance here. Firstly, I'm very happy that together with the University of Milan, Charles University in Prague, we established a project under the umbrella of 4EU Plus Alliance. So it's a great opportunity for our universities to strengthen our collaboration. So this is one of the most important things in this project from the Faculty of Law, from our perspective. Secondly, I'm very happy that this project is created by researchers from different fields. Like we have historians, we have lawyers on board, and we have experts on geography. And this is the future not only for didactics, but also for research. There is no, the only way that the modern university can develop is to focus on those interdisciplinary approach. And what is last but not least, very important in this initiative is the students' involvement. Yeah? Any kind of project without the student is, of course, some professors sometimes joke that the university would be the perfect place without the student, yeah? Because the student disturbs them when doing research. Modern approach to academia should be completely different one. This is the most important pillar, not only in a university, but also in this flagship project. So congratulations to all of those who were involved and I wish you fruitful discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for opening the conference. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Faculty of Law and Administration for their support and assistance with our project. It was very, very helpful. Thank you one more time. And now let's go to our conference agenda. In your conference materials, when you open it, there is one conference agenda for each of you. And our meeting, as you see, will consist of several parts. We will start with an opening lecture introducing the conference theme. Then we will move to the panel A with our presentations of our participants. Then we will have short break, and after that we'll go with conduct panel B with fewer presentation. If you have any questions or suggestions to our speakers and me, we will be happy to answer them during the discussion scheduled for the end of each panel. So panel E, and after that panel B. After our panels, we will go to guided tour to the library building and return here for the coffee break, and then the Metropolis art project will perform. It's our surprise for you. And at the end of today, I would like to propose you the integration in the place that is an example of gentrification. I am thinking of the convert building of the old electricity and heating station. I hope you will like it, the architecture, and so on. So let's us proceed to the opening lecture. If you could change the slide, it would be great. Thank you. Data from United Nations shows that more than half of the world's population lives in cities. The trend is towards urban living. According from the data from population, size and structure, and vital statistic in Poland by territorial division in 2020, authored by Central Statistical Office, at the end of the June 2021, the population of Poland amounts around 38 million people. In urban areas lived about 22 million people, and in rural areas about 15 million. This means that around 60% of Polish people live in the cities. We are not alone in this trend in Europe, in the whole world, I think. If population are moving to cities, I think that this phenomenon is a huge challenge of the city in field of urban planning, construction, transport, public services, such as health and education. So I thought that my purpose today is to consider in this speech the factors that may influence the way of city image, city looks, the view of urban space. I would like to look at this issue from the level of its user, from the level of society. Kevin Lynch, in his book, The Image of the City, wrote, "Probably every city, arbitrarily chosen, has a social image that is the result of the partial duplication of many individual images. Alternatively, there are a number of social images, each of which is shared by some significant number of citizens." This author presented a clarification of 5 types of material elements of the city perception, and these elements are roads, transport hubs, edges, regions, and orientation points. When it comes to roads, he means channels through which city users move, transport hubs as strategic points of the city, like crossroads, edges. It were linear elements, borders between two stages, two areas, regions. He used this term for medium or larger part of the city. And orientation points are reference elements such as towers, large hills, and so on. At today's conference, we will see, I think, the references to all of these elements of city perception. We will be dealing with roads and transport hubs in the perspective of the choice of transport system serving the city. It's a very big problem, I think, now is in many cities. The shape of the city can result from the organization of the certain significant events as social events or even historical incidents or events. They may result in the construction, in architecture, in orientation points. The shape of the city can also be result of city planning a certain type of urban housing. It can be homogeneous or mixed developed with one function or with different functions. Such a function that planners may decide upon its residential, service, social. The choice will shape edges and regions in elements of city perception. So today I think that we will have reference to these all 5 elements, looking at the elements of city perception as roads and transport hubs. I would like to draw your attention to the transport system in the city. The transport system is the backbone of the city. We can choose between different types: road transport, rail transport, including the metro, and air transport. The modes of transport vary in capacity, and I use here very useful infographics of foundations called Procolej, or for train, we could translate it. When comparing the transport here of 800 passengers, rail transport is the most beneficial. The same number of people is carried by 15 buses and 200 of cars. It is worth knowing that passenger road transport is space intensive. The use of the space in transport, the worth of a strip of land with a capacity of 50,000 passengers per hour is shown by another Procolej Foundation infographic. Rail needs at least space. As you can see, only 8 meters. Buses need more, 35 meters. Passenger cars, on the other hand, need as much as 175 meters. Recalling the data from European Environmental Agency, road transport causes the most greenhouse gas emission in transport, about 72%. Air transport causes about 13% greenhouse gas emission. Rail transport only less than 1%. This is an important point which brings us to the issue of routes and transport, especially public transport system, which is crucial for the city. We will today look at metro, trams, buses, and ferries in Prague and Paris. which transport network better meets the needs of its inhabitants in Paris or perhaps in Prague? We will find out during panel A presentation. Another step is our cars. The space in city in the 20th century mostly belonged to the cars. The dynamic development of motorization and the adoption of special policy resulted in the construction of cities in which quarters of building gave way to wide arteries cutting through the urban structure. In the 21st century, this trend means to be changing. Space is being recovered for people. Traffic jams, lack of parking space, emission from transport, air pollution, noise pollution, also smoke, carbon footprint are problems we have to deal with in our cities. This important topic, automotorization of the city, will be addressed during today's conference by exploring and comparing the development of the debate on the role of cars in two European cities, also in Paris and Prague. Could 15-minute city concept and European deal help? We will find out about this also during a panel A presentation. Moving to the elements of city perception as orientation points, I would like to point out one of the reasons for this. This could be the result of events socially or historical. Such events could be the World Fair, which we had the opportunity to learn from our colleague from University of Milan, Fabio Guidali, during our lectures and workshops. Another event of this kind could be sporting events, such as the Olympics. Olympics are known as the mega events, which shape or reshape entire urban landscape. One of the upcoming sporting events of this type will be Winter Olympics in Milan in 2026. With today's presentation, our participants will analyze the historical, legal, environmental, and urban aspects. Historical events such as uprising or wars are another type of event that affects the image of a city. Today we will also look at historical, cultural, social, economic aspects of Waliców Street at Warsaw. In the street there are remains of buildings from the period of Warsaw Ghetto from Second World War. At the same time, the urban space is a space that's constantly being transformed. The development of urban areas means that more and more importance should be taken to spatial planning. Thanks to it, the quality and functionality of space can improve. Elements of city perception as edges and regions are visible in choice of building type, also residential housing one. One of the problems facing cities is nowadays affordable housing. What's the situation in Prague and Milan? We will find out during panel B presentation. Today, however, ordinary housing or ordinary development may no longer be sufficient. It is important that this is green architecture or green planning, let's say. The environmental issues interest not only one country, but the interest of international society. green policy of the European Union affect the urban development at our continent? This issue will be the subject of one of today's speeches. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I will now try to summarize my reflection and draw some conclusions. Lynch elements of city perception are still visible in the urban space. The image still consists of roads, transport hubs, edges, regions, orientation points. These elements we will have the opportunity to recall during today's speeches. Improving urban space is possible through collaboration. I mean collaboration on many levels, learning from the past, from history, to make the future space of our urban space better. This cooperation must also extend to individual areas of social regulations. The planning process should draw of the knowledge of urban planners, architects, geographers, but at the same time we have to be open to the comment of historians, lawyers, NGOs, and ordinary users of the space, the community, the citizens. This is the kind of cooperation we managed to have on our course, I think. Its greatest advantage, in my opinion, was its interdisciplinarity, its openness to other scientific disciplines. By working together, our urban space can become better. Thank you for your attention. Okay, so it's bring us to the speeches of our participants. Your presentation should last around 10 minutes, maybe more, if you'd like. We have the time. If you have questions, as I said, please ask them after panel A presentation. So I would like to wish you successful presentation and discussions. Yeah, and I'm giving the microphone to you now.
Thank you. Does it work? I guess. Okay, thank you for this very interesting introduction. It is my pleasure to announce the opening of our first panel, panel A. And I would also like to remind you that your presentation should, they should last approximately 15 minutes. And after each panel, there will be some time left for the discussion. So I would like to give the floor to our first speakers, Julia Antosiewicz, Érine Brivadis, David Chytil, Sofia Degli Esposti, and Jonas Felkel, who will deliver a paper, Routes and Transport Concepts, illustrated by the city of Prague. So the floor is yours. Yes. Yes.
Okay. So I would like to introduce my group. So that's Érine, Sofia, Jonas, and So the topic is routes and transport concepts. We focused on it because we believe that everybody uses a town, uses the transportation, uses the space of a town and the city. And this is the thing that connects us like the many users of the city, and us as the representatives of different science disciplines. So we believe that the problem is universal, and every person, every member of our group can take the problem and make something important from it in the perspective of its discipline. So each of us will speak about the different aspects of the city of Prague, and we will try to make you all understand and make you all get to know the Prague that we will want to show you. So we will begin with the introduction, with the historical introduction. Then we will move to the current situation, and we will focus on the challenges of the that Prague will face in the future, and we will not forget about the past. So we will talk about the tank monument to show the roots of propaganda and oppression in the streets of Prague, because this is the past that is the reason that caused a present look of the city.
Next slide, please. We'll begin with a brief introduction. We'll begin with a brief introduction to history of Prague, and transport shaped even the founding of Prague, because Prague was founded on a historic way, like crossing for pedestrians and groceries around the river. And due to this way, Prague became an intersection of many medieval routes. And sorry, can I take it out just? Well, I just took it out. So Prague started as a medieval merchant intersection, and then on a waterway of River Moldau, Vltava in Czech, and this was the transportation in Prague for many centuries, and it was then changed with the Industrial Revolution and introduction of trains, which reshaped the way how Prague works around its surrounding. And also at the time of the Industrial Revolution, the city grows, the new suburban areas with a lot of factories, a lot of workers, and a lot of people have to be served somehow. So Prague was one of the first cities in Central Europe to introduce electric trams, and before that, horse-driven trams. And then in the 1820s, the birth of Prague's rapid transit system, public transport system, was started, and it growth ever since. Then in the trams became the backbone of the transportation system of Prague, and they were also held by the metro system, which was added to the city in the 1970s. It was the heavy Soviet type of the metro system, and at the present time, the public transportation is divided roughly in thirds. 1/3 of people are moving through the metro, 1/3 of the people are moving using trams, 1/3 are moving using trolleybuses and buses, and there is also some small percentage of water ferries and so on. So next slide, please. And public transport is still a main way how to move around Prague, but as you see, the modal share on top, but there is also a big problem with suburbanization,
and with a lot of people from Central Bohemian region commuting to Prague with cars. And right now, Prague is as of all other major cities in Europe, sorry for that talking with the microphone, facing a big problem with over-congestion from cars. And also in the city center, the situation is often really controversial, because on the narrow streets, the cars, the trams, and the pedestrian traffic is colliding, and right now the public debate is shaped mainly around cars and mainly about the individual transportation. And I think that we can move to the next slide. I would just add some other information about the transport system. Prague has one of the biggest tram networks on the world. Actually, Lazarská tram intersection is the busiest in whole world, and the transport system serves not only Prague but also its metropolitan area and neighboring regions. And I think that's all from this slide. And we will also compare in our essay Prague to Paris. So I'll give word to Érine to continue.
Thank you. Hi. I don't know how to use a microphone, so I hope it's not too annoying. Okay, perfect. So yes, we will move a bit quickly on all the details about the Metro of Paris, because obviously you don't really care about all the numbers. But the idea was to work on the Metro of Prague. And when I first saw a map of the Metro of Prague, maybe we can move to the slide. I think it's... okay, well, we will wait a bit. Oh, maybe you can show a map. Yeah, thank you. Well, it's a bit far away, but anyway, when I first saw the map of the Metro of Prague, perfect, thank you. The first thing that really struck me was that you have all these wheelchairs accessibility that are designed here. And in Paris, we don't have that, which is crazy, I know. But the thing is, I wanted to do a comparison, because Parisian Metro, oh, sorry, this is annoying. Parisian Metro has 16 lines, and each line has 12 stops, which is a lot. Obviously, Paris is bigger than Prague, so it's difficult to really draw a comparison between the two. But still. And what has been shown is that the RATP, which is the network that really builds the metro, let's say, and handles it, over the past few years, they've mainly been doing some modernization and some broadening of the network, which means that they create new lines constantly, especially with the Olympic Games that will take place there in 2 years. And so, yeah, broadening and modernization. So, for example, we have new cameras that are being installed each year. So each year, more than 10,000 cameras are being installed in the network. So that costs a lot of money. And the question that I asked myself was, how does public and political governance prioritizes things when it comes to the metro? Obviously, the priorities of the two cities are very different. I have no idea what that sound is. Yeah, the priorities are very different because, so, yeah. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, the Parisian metro is always extending, as I said. So the money obviously goes to extension, broadening, and buying new cameras, if I try to summarize it. And they say that they can't build accessibility in the metro because it costs too much money. So obviously it's not a question of money, it's a question of priorities. And when you know that more than 15% of the population of Paris could use accessibility, so they are either wheelchair users, or people with other disabilities, or even people that have strollers with little kids. Obviously, they need elevators to go in the metro, and we only have in Paris 9 stops in the entire Paris. 9 stops are wheelchair accessible, and it's only on 1 line, which means that if you're a wheelchair user in Paris, you can only go on 9 stops inside a city, which is crazy.
Previous slide, please. When compared to Prague, for example, at the visual accessibility, Prague has a long-term goal to make every metro stop in Prague wheelchair accessible. Even then, the costs are really big because Prague Metro was built in the time when accessibility was not the main issue. And for example, right now there is on the station Jiřího Spoděbrad in Prague a big tunnel for a new elevator dug out, and it's really expensive. But as we talk about it, the priorities are a little bit different. Prague is also starting to build another metro line, which is, because Prague Metro is a lot smaller, a big thing in the city, mainly because the city has a lot of problems with administrative issues, like the process of allowing the construction of new Metro D line took more than 6 years, and even more years of planning. But as I heard the news, the final stamp on the allowing of the building process will be delivered in the next few weeks. So I think that we can look on the next slides. Yeah. So,
I just wanted to draw a conclusion on my part, which is basically to say that I try to show how public and governmental how public and political governance can influence people's lives and can influence social wellness. So yeah, that was my point.
Okay, so let's move on another topic. Speaking of transportation in general, looking into the future, we have taken into consideration the big topic of sustainability. And that is, in my view, cities play or are supposed to play, I think, a huge role in transition towards sustainable economy, sustainable mobility, because sometimes governments tend to be quite conservative, and then it could be role of the cities to implement the policies, which gets me to Prague, to Prague's climate plan, and also to the comparison with different cities. Prague is thus, we have Prague Climate Plan since 2021, part of the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, where there are several hundreds or even thousands of cities now. I've checked it. Paris is most progressive one from the participating cities or universities. They have the plan since 2007, then Milan 2009, Warsaw 2018, and then Prague as the last kind of hero with our new climate plan, which took into effect in 2021 in May. With the goal, or it's supposed to implement 2019 commitment of the city of Prague to cut emissions by 45% by year 2030. Well, when you look into the climate plan, it's strategic concept plan, so it's not legally binding really. There are more topics, but speaking of sustainability, it plays a huge role, and also when you connect it to another strategic plan of Prague, which is also as of recently implemented or being implemented, and there's a sustainable mobility plan. That's a general mobility plan for the city of Prague, which was supposed to replace the former plan of 1996. So the sustainability, there is at least this goal that when we plan the city mobility, we should take it into consideration. Please, the next slide. There are the five priorities when speaking of sustainable mobility. First, of course, is increasing the attractiveness, capacity, and effectiveness of the transportation system, public transportation system in general. Then, of course, also the non-motorized transport, like cycling, of course, reducing the intensity of motor vehicle transport. And then maybe the fifth one is the most controversial, promoting the development of sustainable air travel, which was also criticized by many NGOs. And overall, the plan has met some criticism, for example, for not taking into account all possible emissions when planning the city mobility, like planning, for example, Prague's inner circle, which could increase actually the car usage in the city of Prague. There are also other problems, like, of course, not legal binding. Oh, yeah, next slide, yes. Those concept plans are not legally binding, so what is important, we have also, or we are about to have a new spatial plan for the whole city of Prague, so-called mobility plan, which is about to replace the old zoning plan from the 90s, which is a big mess. But it's still debated, and or those debates are not done yet. It should take into effect in 2023. So to sum up this topic, I think it's still it's also a very problematic political issue, climate change, and a big area of cultural wars in the city of Prague, as we will have election for Prague this October, so we'll see whether this climate plan will be followed by the next coalition, which will govern Prague. But at least these plans show the commitment and the rising awareness of those issues. So I can introduce the last topic.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me well. So yes, I decided to next slide, please, to take the concept of routes and transport in a kind of metaphorical way. So I decided to analyze the monument to Soviet tank crews, which was placed in a square. So for sure, it was something that was clearly seen if someone was crossing the square or the routes close by, and also it kind of helps us understanding what we think when we think about monuments. Because a monument, the word means mainly a building, column, or state built to remind people of a famous person or event. So this monument actually wasn't really constructed to be a monument, but it was later attributed with this meaning. And this meaning kept moving together with history and politics and the evolution of these two. And therefore, it continued to move across identity and art of the city. So taking a look of how this monument was placed in 1945 in Kinsey Square was placed this tank that was a commemorative tank that had to commemorate the essential role of the Red Army in the liberation of Czechoslovakia. So it was gifted by the USSR government to symbolize the friendship between the two countries. And also, at the beginning, it had this meaning of friendship, so it was a way to commemorate the friendship between these two countries and the concept of liberation. But also, it meant to exclude other participants to the liberation, so other memories were kind of cancelled to just to promote the idea that it was only the First Ukrainian Front who liberated actually the city. So from the very beginning, this monument had a kind of dichotomy inside, because it was an object of war, so recalling concepts like death, war, and cruelty, but it was associated with a positive meaning, so liberation, freedom, and friendship. So this dichotomy at the beginning was solved because the population of Prague didn't perceive the monument as an imposition, at least this is what it seems from Czech literature at the beginning of 1945 and a bit later on. But it was mostly conceived like a kind of external object, because of course it wasn't made in Prague, but it was internal to the history of Prague and a history of liberation, of freedom. So it was kind of accepted. So the real turning point was in 1968 with the invasion of Czechoslovakia, and at this point, the tank reminded of real tanks working inside the country, and that didn't have a positive meaning or any meaning of freedom and liberation. It was an oppression. So from being a monument for freedom, it became a monument for oppression. And therefore, this dichotomy that could be seen at the beginning was kind of solved. However, it was not clear. So it was like an untold meaning of the monument that arrived to the public scene thanks to an artist, so David Czerny, who decided in one night in April 1991 to paint this monument pink. And this choice at the beginning was a bit it sparkled a fierce public debate. And this monument was repainted with the original color and then repainted pink from some politicians. So it was clear that it was not clear how to manage and to interpret this kind of artistic move. And this is also interesting because in a kind of way, like the act from an individual person can influence and also like make other people and an entire country to, consider its own past. And this can be understood only if we think that after, I would say the crash of USSR, all the countries that were under Soviet influence had to reshape their own cultural identity and national identity. And reinterpreting this identity was never easy, and it sparkled public debate. And so this coloration of the monument somehow symbolized this problem. So while Czerny actually transformed this monument to its opposite, so from a meaning of war, destruction, and oppression, turning it pink, that was a color mostly attributed with concepts of anti-war and peaceful kind of meaning. So it became his opposite. However, now the monument was replaced with a fountain. And the fountain is mostly a reflection of anti-totalitarianism. And in this kind of way, the fountain wants to represent that every form of government and of rule somehow would flow away with the water. However, this consideration of anti-totalitarianism with water and with a fountain is perfect to symbolize also I would say, the national identity that is not completely shaped, there is still a public debate on it, is not clear, it doesn't have real boundaries. So this water symbolizes like this anti-totalitarianism without clear connotation and boundaries because are still to be constructed. So this is it. And these are the sources we used. So
overall, our essay that we just briefly introduced tried to look at transportation and its concept and roots in Prague from different perspectives, as you heard. And we found that not only the past and the present, but also the future is important for that, and that the transportation is linked to many aspects as of accessibility or history and identity of places and people. So that's all from us.
I just wanted to ask if you have any questions.
After the whole presentation of panel A, okay? Okay, so thank you very much for your interesting presentation about routes and transport. Let us now move to Carless Metropolis, a possible future for Paris and Prague. This subject has been prepared by Anna Holzbachova, Adam Marcinek, Natalia Pływaczewska, Federico Stume, who is probably remotely with us because he's at Erasmus in Spain, and Natalie Marie Vrskova. So let me pass over to who is giving the perspective of Carless Metropolis. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I will just briefly introduce our topic and then I will give the word to the others. And I hope our presentation works because we had some problems with formatting, but hopefully it's resolved. We have tried to compare these two cities, maybe a bit differently than our colleagues before. We tried to compare them by combining our different fields of law, geography, and history. So It is a comparison of how these cities are responding to modern trends in urban planning focused on transportation and the environment. So with that, I give the word to my colleague.
Since the turn of the 21st century, several European cities have been engaging in debates about limiting the car traffic in the city centers. In our presentation, we explore and compare the developments of the debate on the role of cars in two European cities, Paris and Prague. Next. Paris' long wear on cars. Today, the French capital is synonymous with car use restriction, but this has not always been the case. Both the Parisian public debate and policy have gone through stages of development on this issue. At the beginning of the 20th century, the automobile played a role in social segregation of the city, as the status of a car owner went hand in hand with a fashionable lifestyle in certain Paris districts. Apart from this, cars became increasingly useful for everyday commuting. During the 1930s, taxi services made up for shortcomings of departmental public transport, and during the same period, automobiles became more used by the middle class. The motorization of the middle class was essentially finished by the 1950s, while the working class started motorizing itself from the 1960s onwards. Car traffic increased for the most of the 20th century until the 1990s, but even during the preceding decades, the sheer amount of traffic had started to become a serious public concern. The 1990s mayor led key foundations for reconquest of public spaces by other than car form of transport. Jacques Chirac, mayor of Paris from 1977 to 1999, was instrumental in governing the city towards pedestrianization. Chirac's main accomplishment was the renovation of the Champs-Élysées and its transformation into the true public promenade with a street wall, street parking, elimination, and refreshed green spaces. In order to prevent cars from illegal parking, Chirac had posts installed on the city's sidewalks. This effort of limiting car use, promoting bicycles, and bolstering public transport has prevailed until today.
Next slide, please. So what is actually the main idea of 15-minute city concept? It's to actually residents should be able to reach anything they need on daily basis, such as restaurants, housing, shopping, or cultural venues by 15-minute walk or 15-minute ride on a bike, not in a car. In other words, the main idea is to ensure minimal travel among housing, offices, restaurants, parks, hospitals, and other venues that residents need in everyday life. Each neighborhood should fulfill 6 social functions, such as living, working, supplying, caring, learning, and enjoying. Psychologists also agree that it's very important for your mental health, especially in this post-corona age, to feel certain belonging to your neighborhood and to your surroundings, because it's actually helpful and it makes people happier. So this is the main idea of the 15-minute concept. Next slide, please. As we can see here on this map, some roads in the Paris will be, some road maps, will be transferred into bike maps or actually pedestrian maps.
So the city will belong more to the pedestrians and cyclists. Also, we can mention some other cities that are inspired by the 15-minute concept of the city, such as Milan, Madrid, Ottawa, or Seattle. They all declare that they will take inspiration from the 15-minute concept that Anne Hidalgo and her co-workers invented. As the last thing, we can mention some other Hidalgo's past projects, such as ban on highly polluting vehicles, the redevelopment of the Seine River embankment, or last but not least, the display of smaller green areas throughout all the Paris, for example, in the schoolyards or the grounds. Next slide, please.
So we have seen what's going on in Paris. And because of its history, we know that it's been struggling with car use and its intensification for many years, and is responding to it by limiting the car use. But what about Prague? As you can see, the situation is quite different. There's about 1 car for every person in Prague, while there's about 1 car for every 12 people in Paris. And the Czechs really love their cars. And we also hate regulations. We really hate regulations. The car is still seen as a symbol of individualism, of freedom of transport, which really wasn't there during the socialist era. So to this day, still people really want to use cars, and they are using them a lot, which is causing, like our colleagues previously mentioned, congestion in the city center and a debate on what is the role of cars in our cities, both environmentally, but of course, as regards to the well-being of the inhabitants of the city. If I could ask for the next slide. Is it possible to actually regulate cars in Prague the same way that Paris is doing? Well, we do not really think so. First of all, a huge part of the Paris plan is to develop this network of bike routes, as you previously saw on the map, and they are devoting about 250 million euros to that end, while Prague has only pledged about 4 million to develop its bike routes, and has, in comparison to Paris, a very sort of small network of these cycling routes, some of which are of very poor quality. And to even combine this idea of cycling everywhere with limiting car use in the city center is unreal, because 2 years ago, Prague tried to limit car use in a 100-meter corridor on the embankment of the river, and this was a huge sort of scandal, and people were crying that they are limiting motorists. There is a war on cars because they closed down 100 meters of a street in the city center to cars, so that there could be art projects and cafes and so on. So we think that maybe the history of Prague and the way it's conceptualized is really contributing to, this love for cars and inability to accept change to the city.
So since I'm a law student, I decided to show you the legal point of view of the urban mobility problem. Since Prague and Paris are capital cities of 2 European Union members, the European law is an important source of law, and we can separate it from the interstate situation. So I decided to tell you about 4, from my point of view, key documents for this topic. But to start, I want to tell that in the European Union, we have a lot of general legislative acts tied to environment, but not really specifically for the car traffic in city centers. We have no legally binding acts for this specific topic, only for the environment as a whole topic. So first of all, we have a Green Deal. I think all of you know it. It's discussed in newspapers, social media, political discussions. It's like a general frame for all the European environmental politics. And it also includes the goal of sustainable transport. But it's very general. It doesn't include any binding regulations. Then we have Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy from 2020, which is more specific than a European Green Deal. It specifies the goals outlined in the Green Deal, and it's a foundation for achieving greener and more sustainable urban mobility in European countries. Connected to that, in 2021, European Commission launched a new EU urban mobility framework, which provides us a more ambitious approach to sustainable urban mobility and gives to regional and local authorities some guidances for their local and regional acts to reach the sustainable urban mobility in their place. So then for the fourth document I chose, it's Fit for 55 package, which is a list of binding acts, regulations, and directives to be adopted. They are not adopted now, but it's like the idea of what we can have for a legally binding acts. And this Fit for 55 package also includes a combustion engine car ban, which is the thing I want to tell you about more. From the title of this document, it may seem that it's a ban of using cars in the cities, but it's only ban on sales and producing the cars, and it wants to reach this goal by year 2035. Can you please give me the next slide? Paris and Prague, or more France and Czech Republic, reacted a bit differently to this car engine ban. As Adam said, Prague and Czech Republic at all doesn't like regulations. So our reaction was really, let's say, not enthusiastic. Our new government, led by Petr Fiala, said that we really don't want that ban because car industry plays a huge role in our industry, in our country, and he said that a lot of people would lose their jobs, and he uses this as like a main argument for not adopting that ban in Czech Republic. France is, let's say, not that aggressive when it comes to reaction to this ban, but they are also not really happy and trying to push back against adopting this ban. So yeah, that's all from me for the European Commission. Thank you.
And maybe just to conclude with the next slide. Yes. To conclude, we maybe wanted to ask you some questions. Of course, you cannot answer now, but think about them. We presented it as the case of development, different historical development, different culture, different social norms, and the response of the cities and the citizens and the governments to new environmental challenges and new challenges of urban planning. But maybe this is a bit of a cliche. Maybe it's a bit of a cliche to say, oh, you know, the Czech Republic, the former socialist country, they really hate regulations. You know, they are not very environmentally friendly, and Paris, it's very progressive. Maybe this is a bit of a cliche. So we would like to ask you to think about this. Maybe, is this only an issue of marketing the changes or the new urban planning? And with that, I would like to thank you. With the next slide, please. There you can see our sources that we used only in the presentation, but if you open this QR code, you can view our whole essay. It is also on our poster, and in the essay there are all the sources we used for the whole thing. So thank you very much.
Okay, so this is now it's my turn. I would like to make short introduction to the first presentation. From human geography perspective, we talk sometimes about the city as an urban theater with actors and an audience which actively participates in this performance. And one of components of these performances are events. The events, international events and big events, will be the topic of the next presentation that will be delivered by international team of Flavio Ferri and Laura Puglisi from Milan, Michaela Kulichova and Prokop Tomasek from Charles University, and Marlena Baran from Warsaw University. So the floor is yours, please.
Hello, 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 hello. Ready? Ready? Okay. Good afternoon, distinguished members of the panel, dear colleagues. Welcome to our presentation. My name is Prokop Tomasek, and together with my co-presenters, Marlena Baran, Laura Puglisi, Michaela Kulichova, Flavio Ferri, and Alessandro Frattini, we would like to discuss the topic of the 2026 Olympic Games in Milano Cortina. The urban regulations and political memory towards understanding, and it will be a multidisciplinary presentation, so get ready. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so Milano has a long tradition of big events. They're sometimes called mega events. These are regularly recurring events that are expected to attract the vast public and public of visitors from abroad. As I stated, it has a long history which started in the 19th century. It goes through the 20th century and now continues with the 21st century with the Olympic Games in 2026. There are two main genres that took place in mega events that took place in Milano: the Olympic Games in the 1950s and the World Fairs. And some of you may also remember the 2015 Expo, which took place in Milano. Basically, these events have a very big and positive effect on the city, and we'll talk about that. But firstly, we'll introduce the previous international events from the past, and then we'll take into consideration the legal basis of the Olympics, the Olympic Committee, the legal framework, and local and international actors. While then we'll follow up with two very important case studies of how two of the Milano's neighborhoods will change because of the Olympics. And lastly, we will try to analyze the concept of smart city and environmental policy implemented in Milan. So yeah, now we will move to the next part, which will be the historical part, which will be presented by Flavio.
In the historical part, we focused on the World's Fair hosted in 1906 by the city of Milan from an historical perspective, and in this way compare with the impact of the next Winter Olympics in 2026. Milan, at the time referred to as the moral capital of the Kingdom of Italy, not only embraced the myth of philanthropy and cooperation, but was also the symbol of industrial and economic development, a role achieved thanks to its central position in commercial traffic and in the transport network. An important part in promoting the candidacy of Milan and the founding of the World's Fair was played by the city elite, but also by the municipal administration who aimed at the recognition of the role of the city as a European metropolis. The next slide, please. Okay, thank you. The World's Fair focused on transport, work, welfare, and self-representation. Transport, because it was very clearly that the focus of the 1906 exhibition was the display of the city's modernity. It was very clear, the city's modernity and its latest development in transport, as the new Piazza d'Armi hosted a lot of exposition dedicated to railways and electric transport, as well as the automobile and the cyclic pavilion. The work, because the population growth after the social uprising in 1898, the municipal government trying to take into account the needs of the working class. This effort was showcased in different pavilions, like the Galleria del Lavoro in Piazza d'Armi and the City of Milan pavilion. This last pavilion was a true stage for the self-representation of the city and for the recent actions taken by the municipality to improve the quality of life of its citizens, public service and sanitary condition. Next slide, please. Okay. The appointed areas of, this slide. Thank you. And the appointed areas of Simplon Park and the new Piazza d'Armi connected by an elevated electric railway homage to the new Simplon tunnel. This tunnel wanted to represent the maximum technology and industry of Italy, and it connected Italy to France, inaugurate that year. Next slide, sorry. Okay. And it became evident soon that transportation wasn't the only focus of the exhibition. Work and welfare managed to carve out an important role in the 1906 event. Milan was the center of reformist socialism and the municipal administration of the time, along the Società Umanitaria, was pursuing its first attempt in social housing, a much-needed solution. The World's Fair became, in this way, the popular for impressive experience, the first social housing estate for workers. This project, designed by Giovanni Broglio, consisted of 249 apartments equipped with drinking water, electricity, private toilets, and it also included additional service like library and kindergarten. Okay, next slide, please. Perfect. Finally, the legacy of the World's Fair, Simplon Park, and Piazza d'Armi gained a new connotation. The first would later become the setting of the Palazzo dell'Arte, dedicated to the Triennale exhibition, a cultural landmark connecting industry, design, and arts. The second one, Piazza d'Armi, became in 1923 the permanent venue of the Milan Trade Fair, now relocated on the outskirts of Milan. Thank you for your attention, and I leave the word to the next part, the legal aspect.
Regarding to legal aspects of the next slide, please, before I start. Regarding to legal aspects of the organization of the Olympic Games in Italy, 2 points should be taken into account. The procedure of the selection of the organizing country by the International Olympic Committee and the legal basis of organization activities in a selected country. The host city of the Olympic Games is chosen during the session of the International Olympic Committee by its members. The host city is selected by majority vote. However, if it does not receive a majority in the first round of voting, further rounds are held until a majority is obtained. Moreover, the choice, next slide please. Moreover, the choice of the Milano Cortina is in line with the Olympics Agenda 2020 reforms, which call for maximum use of existing and temporary venues if there is no demand of the new permanent facilities after the Games. The new tender process was to present a holistic concept of respect for the environmental stability and development to leave a lasting legacy. After the election on 24th of June 2019, a host city contract was concluded between International Olympic Committee, Milano and Cortina, and Italian National Olympic Committee. Given the choice of Milano Cortina as a host city, the Italian authorities were faced with a need to legally regulate organizational activities. In response to this need, the Italian Council of Ministers approved the Olympic law, which will provide a framework for the public bodies entrusted with hosting the 2026 Olympic and Paralympic Winter Games in Milan and Cortina. The Olympic Lab established a joint Olympic Council for Milan Cortina 2026 and the International Olympic Committee. The council is expected to count 15 members, including representatives of Lombardy and Veneto regions, as well as officials of Milano and Cortina. Thank you, and the next part. And now we have our remote colleagues.
We suffer from coronavirus illness of our audio specialist, so I hope we manage to do it alone.
So I can read. I can give a microphone to the laptop. Okay. So we have a technical problems. that means we can hear as well as we want. So I can only read this part. In this part, present Proto-Romana, and the main topics is regeneration of the Proto-Romana railway yard, which is on this picture. Flavio, could you support me if I tell something wrong? The southern urban selection is started between the Via Ripamonti Bridge to the west and the Corso Londi to the east. And next slide, please. And this slide is about Proto-Romana project.
Okay, I can maybe
add something to that. I remember. So it's one of the two projects that will be completed because of the Olympics in Milano. And this idea is basically that there will be running a railway through the project, and part of the railway will be underground, and the ground will serve as a park. So that's an interesting idea. There will be a tunnel, and the above the tunnel will serve as a park. The buildings will serve as an Olympic village, which will then transform into hopefully affordable housing for the city. And part of the project will also be commercial real estate, which will serve commercial purpose in the future. Can I ask for the next slide, please? No? Can we get the next slide? Thank you very much. It's the Olympic Village. Yeah, exactly. It will serve as the Olympic Village for the Olympic Games in 2026, but then will be transformed. Circle economic principle. You don't want to just build buildings just for the sole purpose for the Olympics. It will be then reused for the student campus and hopefully affordable housing project. Okay, next slide. Yes, good. That's my part, so I know something more about that. Santa Giulia. What is Santa Giulia? That's the second neighborhood. Basically, this is a big part of the city of Milano. It's divided. Goes from the southeastern corner, was a train station, to the southwestern to northeastern corner. So it goes diagonally. The big part in the round-shaped part in the top is Pala Italia Arena, which will serve as a ice hockey venue for the 2026 Olympic Games. Right now, at this very moment, the southwestern part has been built already and is serving its purpose as a residential building and some commercial buildings. Then there will be a big urban park in the middle, and the biggest part will be in the north. Next slide, please. What is the Pala Italia Arena? Is the Winter Olympics venue which will host the ice hockey games for the Olympics. It will be a sustainable structure which will minimize the carbon dioxide emissions and will fulfill all the eco-friendly criteria that such a structure has to fulfill at this stage. It should be practically self-sufficient. It should not need a lot of electricity to run because it will be covered by solar panels in the top and should be self-sufficient. Next slide, please. Okay, next slide. Yeah, two pictures. Infrastructure. The idea is that because of the car congestion and that what we've heard, Milan is also affected by this. Well, the idea is that not all the roads in the neighborhood should be accessible by everyone equally. One part of the roads should be accessible only for visitors. That goes primarily for the Pala Italia Arena and the commercial sectors. And then the rest of the roads should be accessible mainly for the residents, which should be allowed to go through all the streets and to park wherever they want because they live there, basically. Okay, next slide, please. And the second idea was that not only the cars should be minimized, but also the public transportation should be emphasized and increased. So public transportation will play a huge role in the development of the project. There will be new, as I said, the neighborhood is cornered by train stations which work today, but they will be connected by new bus lines and tram lines. And also there will be cycling and mobility bike lanes and bike sharing loop in the neighborhood, which will go through that and should allow the residents and visitors alike to more easily access the neighborhood. Okay, next slide, please. and that is the smart city part, which should be another remote speaker. So I guess I'm the speaker right now. Flavio, Miguel, okay. Towards the smart city. What are the main points? Innovation, infrastructure, brighter future. Thank you. Next slide, please. It's supposed to be a very smart city, Milano, as is written down. The idea is that it's supposed to work through the not only upholding the eco-friendly codes and policies, but to work towards the more circular economy and reuse of the spaces. So, as was stated in the Olympic code and the Olympic policy, that the arena and everything should be self-sufficient. It should work like this with also with the whole neighborhoods, which should be eco-friendly and self-sufficient as far as electricity, gas, and other necessities are concerned. Next slide, please. Eco-sustainable, yes, we've talked about this already. 100% renewable, ban of single-use plastic and packaging. That's a big topic that should be introduced for the foreseeable future in Milano. Next slide, please. In conclusion, okay, that's my part again. Oh, okay. What is the conclusion? Basically, Milano has a big history with mega events, and these have generally resulted in the construction of new neighborhoods and new buildings and new projects in the city. And they have greatly increased the city's capacity and improved the city in many ways. And Milano is trying to achieve this with the new neighborhoods for the 2026 Olympic Games. And by that, they would also want to fulfill its environmental pledge, because the environmental concern is very important for Milano and would like to be fulfilled as well. Okay, that's everything for me, and we thank you for attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and one more time, I apologize for this trouble with sound, remote sound. So now we have time for our Q&A session. If you'd like to ask any question or comment something, that's the time you can do it. So please, the floor is yours.
Okay, so I have the question to the second group, Carless and Metropolis. You asked about the around the Antosiewicz question, and I thought about it, but I want to ask you, why according to you there is a difference between the growth of two cities when it comes to the current state?
Maybe I can even stand up now. That would be more polite towards you. Sorry. So the cars were seen as a class-based issue at first, the ownership of motor vehicles, and afterwards, with the sort of proletarization of the cars, to use this word, and making them more common, they were still seen a bit more problematically. And with the whole political developments in France, I think they have come to a conclusion that they can actually limit cars, that they are not, as in the Czech Republic, the symbol of prosperity and of our manufacturing, of our sort of pride of transforming from the socialist country. So we really see this as an issue of social values, where the politicians might have similar views on what needs to be done, but it's really hard to push these reforms. And it's very easy to use public voice in France to say, but we need to protect our streets and our well-being. But in Prague, it's very easy to say we need to protect our cars and our ownership of them. So I think that's what we sort of came to the conclusion that this is a historical cultural difference.
Basically, yeah, the metro line, train station lines should be constructed, new ones, and these should serve as the main transportation hub for the municipality neighborhood. So not only there will be new metro line, there will be also new transportation stations just for the neighborhood.
You have ended. Okay.
I would have also a question for the third group. I think it wasn't mentioned, I don't know, the political aspects or the debate in Milan, whether, because I think Winter Olympics are very controversial, at least in Europe, not many cities want to make them, and there are always referenda which oppose the plans of the municipality. So maybe if you know, and also maybe other participants from Milan, to say something about the debate, because I saw they try to make it as sustainable as possible and kind of to make it as part of the city, but still, if you can comment it somehow.
Begin? Okay, so the idea is that it's not only Milano, but it's also Milano Cortina. So Cortina hosts, I don't know if it's World Cup Championship something, and skiing every year. So basically all the venues for the alpine skiing, or many of the venues, are already built. So as far as Milano is concerned, the main venue is now the Pala Italia Arena, which should serve as a ice hockey venue, but also it should have many different purposes, not only ice hockey, but also basketball, ground floor hockey or something, I don't know. But there's definitely discussion regarding this topic, because also there should be some kind of reconstruction of the San Siro stadium, which a lot of people say that is not very necessary. Rest of my group is coming, so maybe I can say something about that, since I'm not from Milano. But yeah, basically there's a discussion regarding this topic. Yeah. Was there a referendum for the Milano Cortina Olympics in Milano?
Absolutely not.
Yes, I just wanted to ask the group, the second group. So obviously now, in Paris, some areas are restricted to like non-car areas, as you said, obviously. But I just wanted to state that, I mean, there has been protests, there has been people in the streets saying it is wrong. And so it's not something that was like French people or Parisian people in this instance didn't say like, oh yeah, we don't like cars, that's fine. I'm just stating that, and also I just have a question, because you said that it's mostly about the mindset and like the social and cultural past of the cities and of the countries, obviously. So you said that for Prague inhabitants it was important to have freedom of moving and ownership, which is understandable. But also Paris is the only city in France, I mean not the only, but the only big city in France that is trying to implement this kind of non-car using. So is it a Paris mindset, or like how can you justify it other than just saying, yeah, it's because of social cultural changes?
So maybe, unless someone else from the group wants to answer, basically, I think I agree with you. I mean, it's never as easy as to say, you know, there's this one mentality in the city. Even for Prague, that's why there were concluding questions, because, and why I said it's a bit of a cliche to think this way about our cities and our mentalities. But in terms of what we found out, and in terms of even the material reality of how much Paris has actually pledged or budgeted for this development of bicycle routes and actually creating these restrictions, and what Prague has done, and how many cars there are in Prague, and how many cars there are in Paris compared to the people. This is also a material reality, and it's also true that, you know, in the end, the car industry does make up about 20% of the Czech GDP, so it's not like a complete nonsense that the restrictions would be tough on our economy, but we wanted to focus on the culture and the history and sort of bring it together and maybe problematize it as you have done right now.
I have a question for the transport group because no one asked them anything yet. And I want to ask about the sustainable air travel. You said that it's a controversial topic, so like what does it mean and why is it controversial?
Well, I can answer it in context of Prague, because there is a debate about expansion of Prague Václav Havel Airport, which is the only and the main airport of the city. And there is a discussion about building a second runway, which will be closer to the city center, closer to the places where people live. And the discussion about it is also about the volume of people moving to Prague with the airport, because it's seen mainly from the people who live in the city center not only as an environmental thing, but also as an over-tourism thing, because they see the limited capacity of the airport as a way how to set some limit of number of tourists in Prague. So there is actually an active initiative called, I can translate it roughly to English, it's like Prague Airport, do not destroy, do not extend it, and enlarge it. And the debate is between the over-tourism, between the environmental issue, point of view, and between the economical and movement point of view. Because the bigger airport means also, more opportunities. So, and actually, the state, the Czech Republic, which is owner of the airport, wants to extend it. And the second big player is Prague, which is which has a lot of ways how to say its votes in the planning process. And Prague is really divided. The political scene of Prague is divided between these two points of view, even in the coalition and in the opposition in Prague, town hall.
Marlena Baran, at the end.
I have a question to group number 2, the car group. Do you know if Czech government or Prague authorities try to limit the number of cars in the center of city by do applicable parking zones or increasing parking bills in the center, because in Warsaw we have applicable parking zones, and in the center of the city there is no private cars. Like in Krakowskie Przedmieście, at the weekends, the private cars can ride, and it is only a public street to go for a walk or buses can ride on the street. And is there this option in Prague, or? And you can tell about Paris if you know also. How is it?
Thank you. So in Prague, we have so-called blue zones, which are parking places for residents of Prague. And they are able to park there, and they are paying, I guess, yearly fee for parking here, and there are no more space for other people than the residents, because they're yeah, they can pay it, but there's limited space for them because of that, I guess. And I think we do not have like limits for like weekends, but Prague tries to limit like old lorries and tourist buses, which have which have a lot of emissions. So the level is high, then they can't go to the city center because of that. But there is no like car ban for the whole center. There are some parts where cars can go, but it's really, yeah. I think I do not have more for that.
If I can add something, it's actually, there's an advantage for people, for owners of electric cars, because they don't have to pay anything. It's just completely free for all the parking places. Okay, great. So no more advantage for owners.
They will pay half the price because there is increasing amount of them, so it wouldn't be sustainable for long period of time.
Okay.
They will be standard. I'm not from the group, but may I add something to the question? Sure. Well, I think in Prague it's like the main topic for the elections that will be on the city level at September or beginning of October. It's like a big, I would say, populistic topic, like the way how cars should be in Prague or shouldn't be. And actually any like change in the city center in favor for other modes of transport is generally like seen as really bad thing from one really loud part of the public debate, and actually there are places like main road on Malá Strana side of the river where trams, pedestrians, bikes and cars share the place, and the majority of people goes in trams and go as walkers, but the cars are like taking the most of the space, and even on these like places where it's totally clear that big majority of people go in trams and the cars are slowing them down, it's still like not closed, not resolved. Even this concrete spot was like the reason for building a whole tunnel around the western side of the city center. There's like in Prague tunnel for cars, and like 12 years ago or 15 years ago when it was built, one justifications for the cost was the closing of this like this central road for cars, but it didn't happen. Like we are creating more like spaces for cars to go around the city center, but any closure of even the smallest space is seen as a really big problem from like a big part of Prague political spectrum, and I think it's like the biggest public debate issue in Prague, and it's like turning from like a discussion about the positives and negatives to like cultural wars, tense like problems when people are just shouting on each other, and it's like artificial clash between cyclists and motorists, which is not the case in like most of like situations.
Okay, thank you very much for your questions, answers, and comments. And I have to announce the break. 2 minutes for rest, and then we will meet at the panel B. Okay? So at 5. Okay? We will come back here at 5 o'clock. Thank you.
will be. And the first paper in this panel will be delivered by Julia de Karolini, Marek Marcibal, Zachary Milonas, and Wit Schramek. And they will talk about Walisów project, the DNA of Warsaw.
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Hello.
Maybe now.
Okay. Thank you. Hello and welcome to our talk. We're going to be talking about this beautiful site of Walisów. We're not going to talk about cars, sorry. This is going to be a little bit of a history lesson, a little bit of urbanism, and a really important piece of heritage in Warsaw, that is Walisów Street, and how it can be encompassed and how it can be involved in the current and contemporary city planning. So, take it away, Julia.
Thank you. The Warsaw Ghetto, razed to the ground by the Nazis during the Second World War, is a place that has left few material traces behind. It seems to no longer exist, erased from the face of the earth and survived only in memory. Warsaw, liberated in January 1935, was in fact a defunct city that needed considerable efforts to recover. The reconstruction, immediately undertaken, became a process of transformation within a few days. The new communist authorities started a program of radical restoration of the city and the reorganization of the urban fabric. Warsaw, capital of a popular republic, had to reborn as a socialist city. Despite the disappearance of material and chronological references caused by the apocalyptic Nazi herbicide, the ghetto survives and still resists in the physical structure of the current city. There is a buried Warsaw, a sort of immense archaeological field which supports the forma urbis of the current city. In Walikov Street, the last fragments of the war city emerge, which seem to directly come out of the urban desert photograph taken in December of 1935 by the Soviet reconnaissance aircraft. Therefore, these buildings represent an historical fragment of what was the Warsaw Ghetto before being completely razed to the ground by the Nazis' bombing. Almost the entire Walikov Street was actually within in the boundaries of the ghetto, from the moment it was closed in November 1930. It was included in the so-called small ghetto, which extends south of Chlodna Street. If you could, please. Okay. According to official data, at the beginning of 1931, at least 4,137 people lived in Walikov Street. And as in the whole ghetto, the congestion and overcrowding in Walikov Street were enormous. Jews were forced to live, suffer, and die in a crowded space. According to historian Barbara Eckling, the ghetto management program followed by the Nazis could be considered as an attempt of spatial destruction in stages. The area of the ghetto was gradually shrunk from about 400 hectares to about 100 hectares. The initial dichotomy of the Aryan Jewish zone had to be resolved at the gradual extinction of the Jewish one. And in October 1931, Walikov Street was also hit by these changes aimed at shrinking the ghetto. Jews were forced to leave their houses. Moreover, during the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, fighting and destruction were also present in Walikov Street. The next slide, please. But the next slide. Okay. But how can we reintegrate these ruins into the new urban dynamics of the city? In every age, wars have produced ruins, making men interrogate themselves on what to do with them and how to make ruin being an always contemporary concept. Today, the three buildings ruined in Walikov Street are marginal and isolated from the rest of the urban dynamics due to the forgetfulness they have been subjected to over time. In order to give them a new life, it is necessary to ask ourselves the reason for this abandonment, which is related to the complex relationship between Poland and the memory of the Shoah. During the communist regime in Poland, the memory of Jewish community was in fact condemned to oblivion. A critical awareness of the specific characteristics of the Jews' Nazi extermination was prevented, relating the Jews' genocide to the myth of the Polish nation as victim and hero. Polish society, desiring to forget its role as a witness of the Holocaust, wished to erase it from its memory. For this reason, the years between 1948 and 1968 are defined by Steinlauf as years of rejected memory. Buildings and cemeteries were thus abandoned to devastation and forgetfulness, just as in the case of the ruins in Walikov Street, which are a concrete example of the removal of a piece of national history from the collective consciousness. Only after 1989, the conditions to change the status quo were created. The democratic state had generated a need to rethink the meaning of citizenship and gave a new interpretation of cultural pluralism. In this new democratic context, the interest in Jewish culture was developed, as well as the need to reinterpret Polish history and common identity. The marginalized memory of Shoah entered the public debate in order to make a critical reworking on the memory of the genocide possible. For this reason, a special presence of Jews started to re-emerge in the built environment. Various buildings, once forgotten, have been renovated over time and started to attract local, national, and international attention. And as a consequence, it boomed and intensified the creation of Jewish memorials and museums. In Poland, the memory of the Shoah has hardly emerged and still has to deal with a majority of political and cultural forces that tend to minimize the historical responsibilities of those who assisted the Nazi extermination apparatus. Today, the memory elaborated by the liberal forces must also face the one promoted by the conservative coalition currently in government, which aims to revive the myth of the victim and hero that people elaborated during the communist regime. Therefore, the reintegration of ghettos fragments in Walikov Street into the new urban dynamics of the city could lead to the creation of a space in which the Shoah can be documented and witnessed, known through a system of spaces organized for the critical reworking of the specific characteristics of the Nazi extermination of the Jews. Therefore, the creation of a memorial would give citizens a greater historical profundity to their gaze on the places they pass through every day. Furthermore, local history could become a helpful tool for historical knowledge and a complete awareness of the nature of Shoah. In a society where the risk of historical simplification is always high, valorizing the memories of the city would allow the integration between the communities of memory. Moreover, these ruins would serve as a pretext for discussing Polish and European history from the early 20th century until today, from budding nationalism to unity, and about what Europe stands for today, about its shared values, goals, and goals problems. To conclude, this book project has the potential to become a symbol of Warsaw and a model solution for direct similar memorial places in the capital, in Poland, and in Europe. I give the floor to Vit.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Another one, please. Okay, so now let's take a look at where the Walisław Street is. As you can see, it's pretty close to us, right? We're like a couple streets away. It's right in the center of Warsaw. Please remember that. That is a very important piece of information for the remainder of this presentation. Next slide, please. Here's a closer look. As you can see in the red, it's quite a tiny street. Next slide, please. But it's still very important. But why? Well, before we ask ourselves why, let's look at what it looks like today. If you ask someone, what's Walisław like, you can hear words like, well, it's a ruin, it's destroyed, it's such a mess, it's terrible. It's not a nice thing to hear or say about, your house, for example, but that's the way people can describe that area. Well, why is that? It's quite a mixed place. I mean, if you take a walk along Walisław Street, you can see some ruins. As you saw, I don't know if you got the chance before, the bombed buildings, some of them you could still see today. There's also houses that look like they haven't changed a bit from like the 70s or whenever they were built, and you can play a movie about communist times there. And if you look on the next street, there's high-rise skyscrapers of fancy companies, multi-billion-dollar companies. So it's quite a mixed area. And it's undergoing a fast-paced transformation. But why? Well, as you saw in the first picture, it's right in the center of Warsaw. It's in the downtown area. It's the perfect place to be if you want to be seen. If you're a rich company or anyone who wants to be seen, the center is your place to be. But it's also a very rich place in the composition of its inhabitants. You have both students that live there because of the cheap rent, as well as old people that never wanted to move away. Next slide, please. Well, and these people that live there are very important to include in the process of shaping the future of that area, because it ensures that everything they need will be covered, because who else knows what's best for them than the people that live there? And what they decided that they want is that the street needs a place for the community to meet. Next slide, please. Thank you. So there's two processes at play on Wałęsa Street. One of them is gentrification and one of them is revitalization. If you're geographers, you probably heard about that, but for those who haven't, let's take a quick overview. Gentrification is quite a varied topic that doesn't really have a standardized definition, but the one that we see the most related to Wałęsa is a negative one, because it's the external force of the skyscrapers and monotone office building blocks trying to make their way into the area. While on the other hand, what's proposed as a much better solution is revitalization, which uses the cooperation of the local groups to push forward their needs and interests and consider what they need. Next slide, please. So there are several variants of what could be done with Wałęsa. You can see them in the table here. Variant A is the most conservative one, just protect what we already have. Variant B, let's do a bit more, let's do some expansions. And variant C, the most aggressive one or the most radical one, quote unquote. Well, that's a really interesting one. Next slide, please, and we can look at what they want. So the dark area on the map is the houses that are to be preserved if we use the variant A. Just take what we have, make sure it's fine, leave it at that. Variant B, let's build another building with it. And variant C, let's also have a green space, which is perfect, for a community meet, for example. Next slide, please. And now, Marek, you have the floor.
So, we need also to talk about the future and the role of Wałęsa in the future. Next slide, please. And for that, we need to talk about museum activism. Sorry. I presume everyone has been to museum, but what we call museum activism is an approach in which the museums are the active participants. For example, I go to a museum, to the Polish Museum, 50 or 25 minutes away from there, and I will be confronted, I will be approached, and my view will be challenged by the museum on various topics. So I will be engaged in a dialogue. My interest will be sparked, and maybe I will learn something that will be forgotten by the time of the lunch. That's the ideal part. Of course, museums are always focused on telling stories. Basically, it's from the dead to the alive, which could be very well in our Wałęsa project. Next slide, please. It's the opportunity to tell a story, not a story of all the Jews in the Poland. We have the Polish Museum for that. But we could tell a very interesting story about the last remnants of the Warsaw Uprising. That would be very interesting. And it's natural. You go from the Poland Museum to the Warsaw Library Monument, then you take the geographers. About 15-minute walk, 30 if you have a beer. And then you have to come to Walitov Street to look at the last remains of 3 buildings which were untouched for almost 70 years. I think it's quite interesting. And with the great possibility to become a museum. Because, next slide please. As you can see, on the left, there's an aerial photo from 1945 after the bombing. And we see the ruins of houses in the Walitov Street. On the right, you see that there is a parking lot. And it's from 2021. Of course, as always. So, our plan, or the plan of the Walitov DNA project, was to basically turn the parking lot into an excavation and archaeological site, which would serve as an open space museum in combination with the Walitov Street number 14, which would become a museum of the Warsaw Uprising on the ground floor, which is very important. Go to the next slide, please. Because with inclusive design, it's all about the symbol. If you have the symbol or the museum of the oppressed people, you cannot build a museum with four flights of stairs in there. So disabled people, handicapped people have a very tough time to get there, or they even couldn't get there. So that's the perfect place for us, for this kind of museum, for this kind of story. Also, this place resonates with people. We have to explain 2 terms, to resonate and to wonder. To resonate, as per Ms. Greenblatt, means the power of the displayed object to come to you, basically. And to wonder means to be able to stop you in your tracks. Just wonder what it is, what's resonating with you. An example, because it's very tough, very academic definition. You go, for example, in Riga. Last year I was in Riga, and you go to the Jewish museum, which is located in the former Jewish ghetto. You go to a Jewish house, into the first floor. Stairs are still creaking because they're very old, and you came into the room. 5-member family with them, and the first thing you see is a children's toy. Well, you are going to cry like a little baby, like I. It's a natural reaction for me. Because it resonated with you. All those things could happen and didn't happen, or happened there. And that's all. Next slide.
So, as you've seen, Walitów is an important part of our heritage in Warsaw. I hope after this presentation you take away a little bit more that Walitów is not only associated with a police station that is there, but also these ruins, which can become a really important piece of the DNA of Warsaw. Thank you for coming.
Okay. The next presentation will be about affordable housing in Prague and Milano, and this presentation will be delivered by Lorenzo Ferraro and Caterina Romano from Milan, and Petra Wawrowa, Nicola Columbi, and Teresa Peterlingova from Prague. Before you start, I just want to make a short remark concerning this presentation about the history and Walitów, because while we are sitting here enjoying very interesting presentations, less than 300 kilometers from here, the cities are being destroyed, demolished, And when you started to talk about this DNA, I just started to think about, you know, what will left. I'm afraid that the history will be erased from the urban fabric in Ukraine, and instead of cities, we will have empty spaces, and the next presentation will be about housing. And usually when we talk about housing, we talk about place to live in case of what's going on in Ukraine. I think that there is additional dimension. It's about not just housing technically, but it's about shelter, about space where you feel comfortable and safe. It's about habitats, about something that is crucial for human beings. And all these things are being destroyed over there, and this is a very sad story. It will be probably also interesting case for studies on how to rebuild these cities and what's going to happen. And maybe we will start to think about subway systems, that they should be constructed in different way just to serve as a nuclear shelters. Before we haven't thought about it, or it was not common thinking. So anyway, so just keep it in mind. But it doesn't mean that we have, you know, to be now dominated by this war. No, 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 no. This is just interruption. Okay, the floor is yours.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for an interesting contribution. I hope you hear me well. And first I would like to introduce my team. So this is Petra. She's a law student as well as I am. I'm Teresa. This is Nicola. He's a geographer. And Lorenzo, he's a historian. So you can see we already had the interdisciplinary group at the beginning. And we are thinking about some topic that connects us and connect our cities where we live. And we decided it's a housing crisis. And even though the historical background of our countries and of our cities are different, the situation of the cities, as you will see later, has a lot of similarities. So first we'll talk about our cities separately, then we compare, and then we'll talk about what can be done. So please, another slide. We'll start with Prague. Another slide, please. Well, Prague is a city with a long history, beginning from the medieval ages, as we were talking about before, and it has been an important cultural and economical center, and well, it will be quite difficult to talk about the whole history of our city, so let's say it has always been kind of a important crossroad and important cultural spot, and I would pin out the era in between the wars. But the Second World War and let's say after the Second World War, it had a huge impact on the city because our country was governed by the communists for more than or for 40 years, and well, we had to change our economy to centrally planned. Then the majority of the real estate was in hands of the state, and during this era also, as you can see on this picture, most of the housing estates were built, which are like large construction projects with a lot of flats. And if we can move on to the other slide, please. Then after the Velvet Revolution, the main role of the state was to kind of recreate a functional real estate market because like the economy changed to the free market, and yeah, well, the state basically used those key instruments, as you can see on the slide, like more than 84% of municipal flats were privatized during this 20 years era, and also more than 75 houses were restituted in the city center, which is quite big number. And yeah, and I'm not sure if we have enough time, so I'll give my word to Nico.
The next slide, please. I'll just quickly join in on the situation in Prague. 44% of the flats is in personal ownership, which is relatively high, considering, for example, Germany or Berlin specifically, where a lot of people are used to renting more than owning apartments. The average price, you can see it on the screen, it's quite high. When we were looking at the prices of cities, living in the city in Europe, Prague was the only Eastern European city in the top 50 considering the price of housing. So the rent price, the prices of rent are high, and this has been often attributed to investment flats, basically flats being bought by rich people to sell in the future because the prices are growing, by an empty city center, by Airbnbification, and by touristification. And I would like to mention here that 5% of the housing stock is owned by Prague and its city parts, which is important. And also regarding socialism, the biggest chunk of the flats owned by the municipalities is in the housing estates. I'm passing on the mic
to Lorenzo, who is from Italy and is going to talk about Milan. So Milan and the social housing issue, we consider it about from the end of the Second World War. So Milan considered that the 30% of the buildings was damaged from the war, and also from a moral perspective, the new Italian democracy had to rebuild from the 20 years of the fascist regime, and through the constitution we had the reflection on how to guarantee the right to house even to, let's say, working class people and low-income social groups. And it was a peculiar conflict between the new Christian democracy and the Italian Communist Party, since the Christian democracy attached an unquestionable role to private property, whereas obviously the Communist Party was against this forced property, as they called it, for social houses and in general for apartments. So after the, let's say, this first contrast between these two parties, we had the central government who started a project called the Una Casa Plan, which you can read on the screen, and it was a project that guaranteed for working class people apartments with a scheme of 25 years later buyback scheme, and it helped to create opportunities all over the country, and in particular in Milan it was fundamental for the project of Comasina, which was a neighborhood in the northern suburbs. It had over 250,000 square meters for about 10,000 inhabitants, and it was considered as a self-sufficient, newly planned, let's say, neighborhood through the Christian values of cooperation and reciprocal help. However, the real issue was that Comasina was was poorly organized and completely isolated from the rest of the city. And in addition, during the 50s, there was a massive migratory inflow from southern Italy, which created sort of islands of exclusion from people in Milan and the new coming from south. And the issue of housing had other, let's say, problems due to the crisis between after 1968. In particular, we had the rising of extreme left groups, which didn't support the Communist Party plan for housing, social housing, and even worse for the Christian democracy. And they started the squatting actions, or even also what was called the free rent strike, and all these
created a social tension which was appeased in 1978 with a social rent control law from the central government, which, however, was considered as too leftist, particularly from the real estate agencies, and it was repealed in 1992. So the situation in Milan today, yes, okay, it's extremely different, and as you can read, Milan, however, is also somehow a particular case in Milan, in Italy, because in Italy we have the general stats that gives you 4% of the houses in general are considered as social housing, whereas in Milan this stats grows to the 10%, which is pretty interesting as a data. And as you can read, there are 65,000 flats destined for the social housing, but there is also a waiting list of approximately 30,000 people, and particularly in our days, there is a growing problem with the racial issues since the new social housing projects are more and more destined for migrants from Africa, and this is leading to the racial consequences of discrimination and the right wing contesting the municipalities who give all of these new social houses to migrants and not to the Italians who are considered to be the real assignees destined for these houses. And now I leave to Petra.
Hi, can we, yes, perfect. At the very first, we thought we would only do Prague because the Italians were missing, and we're like, we're gonna make it easier. And then they came back and said that the sources were in check, so how they were gonna work with that. So this is where our comparative perspective comes from. We found out, actually, that there is more similarities maybe than differences. We were probably expecting a different outcome because both those cities have the population of over 1 million. They are both like industrial centers and regional powerhouses of their region, and they are both heavy in tourism, which is an important factor for some of the reasons for the housing crisis that we perceive in both those cities to be. Yes. So I started with the similarities that are on the bottom, but yeah, the housing situation is terrible, and they are otherwise pretty similar in other aspects. They do have key differences, though. If we want to talk numbers, then I think we already mentioned that about 5% of the housing fund in Prague is in public ownership, but it's not in like one hand. It's not only the city of Prague. It's the city of Prague and the number of administrative districts, and they each govern the allocation and the systems that give these flats to people very differently. Whereas in Milan, it's about 10% of the housing fund, and all those flats are in the ownership of like regional public companies, not in the municipality itself, and not divided amongst those. They both, Prague and Milan, have a problem with management, though, because as you could read on the previous slide, a lot of the flats in Milan are empty. There's a waiting list. They do, however, have the centralized system for the allocation of these apartments, whereas Prague is divided, and the management problems come from the lack of cooperation between the city parts and the city itself. And yeah, that's probably it, because I'm not going to burden you with all the terms that we have for the different systems in Milan's housing. And let's move on to basically the concluding remarks and the conclusions we draw from what we found out. Oh yeah. This is so we don't have as few pictures as it looked like. These are charts that illustrate, they do have different like year spreads, but they do illustrate the rate of privatization in both Prague and Milan, which, as you can see, is, oh, can you see that? Is pretty high in both those areas. So it's not that much of a reaction to the communist era as we thought, but it's an overall worldwide phenomenon. Can we go to next slide?
So in the end, we asked ourselves, what can be done? We tried to figure out something based on the articles we read, on the documents we found. And there appear to be a lot of solutions, some of them better, some of them good. By better managing the municipal housing, we're talking about coordination inside of the city, which mostly concerns with Prague, where the ownership is very fragmented, and it's done, there's 57 municipalities in Prague, and they can all govern and give out their apartments. Basically, there are rules, but they can do it on their own preferences. If this were to be unionized or somehow like made into a unitary movement, maybe people could be even allocated more so around Prague and not have to deal with the one office. It's also important to think ahead in terms of privatization. Privatization is a way for the city or the municipality to quickly make money if they so need it, but then they are lessening the amount of houses they have in their housing stock, which can be a big problem in the future. And also, they should think about investing into new housing. But then the question is, where do the municipalities get the money to invest into new housing, which requires a lot of funds? By rent control, for example, we mean not a brutal flat cap on the rents like it was in the previous regime, but maybe limiting the growth of rents, which are growing every day and every month. By taxing, we mean maybe proposing a tax for the second, third, or fourth owned property, basically trying to allow more people to have the housing and keeping some certain landlord companies or something of, sorry, how to say it, like to collectively buy the housing and raise the prices even more through their larger share of the market. By limiting the Airbnb rules, which are tiny on the slide, we mean limiting the amount of nights you can spend in the Airbnbs, basically limiting the number of short-term rentals per month or per year. This is already being done, for example, in Amsterdam, where they have a big problem with this, and I'm not certain about the number, but they have limited the amount of nights you can rent the apartment for short-term renting per month, which is basically helping put the apartments back into the long-term housing stock. And with the cooperation, it's important to connect the system with the people that actually need the help. And with this, we think that using non-profit organizations and the civic society is a great way to connect the people, the system, and like everything that basically needs to be connected for the system in order to properly work. And as a concluding remark, we would like to say that even though the cities have the same problems, they don't have the same solutions. Every city is different, and context matters a lot. And for every situation, you basically have to tailor a solution based on the problems you're presented with and based on the context you're presented with. So from our group, I want to thank you for your attention. And we would also, we would also like to thank the tutors for fixing up our essay, because what we sent them was very much work in progress, and they managed to give us constructive criticism. So thank you for that as well.
Thank you very much. Let us now move to the green policies of the European Union. Matthias Jan Kadleczek and Eugenia Nunciana, could you give us a closer, unfortunately short look of history of green policies of the UA and its reflection in the EU taxonomy for sustainability? Remotely, we have, unfortunately without voice, Lucia Brisudova, Luisa Montenegro Holu, and Mauro Pedilarco. So, Matthias, Eugenia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, so we already introduced our group, but I will also relocate our fields of study. We had Luisa from law faculty, Mauro is from history faculty, Eugenia is from law faculty, and I'm also from law faculty. So we have like few fields of study, but we are mainly talking about the legislation which we took before, which we choose because we are all from law faculty. So maybe it will be not so interesting for those who are not. But when we were looking for the topic, we were also looking at what topic connects all of our cities and all of our fields of study. And so we took the sustainability topic as the one that is important for all of the fields of study we are in, and also the European Union context of the sustainability, which is concerning all of cities we live in. And because the sustainability is a very broad topic and European Union is not very small, so we choose only the legislation recently passed and recently in action, it's the European taxonomy. We will try to present you the background of the legislation and also the implications for the future. And for that, I will pass the mic to Eugenia, and she will try to do the introduction, but please keep in mind that that was the part that Luisa brought, so we are not like 100%.
So if we could move to the next slide, please. Okay, so as was said in the presentation, right now we are living in an environmental crisis, and I guess that every country has acquired that we are living in this moment, and they're trying to make some, to create some treaties and to face and to deal with this problem. But at the same time, even though every country, as I said, are aware of this issue, there is also the economical aspect, so that even though all the governments knows that we are exploiting our earth and the resources are not limited, sorry, there is this aspect, and we need to find a balance between these two topics. European Union has been taking the lead in the relation to several green policies, and especially this is what we're talking about, the European Green Deal and especially the EU taxonomy. And this package of green policies is called, as I said, the European Green Deal. So if we could move forward, please, at the next slide. And yeah, so the main goal of the European Green Deal is to transform the EU into a modern, resource-efficient and competitive economy, and to ensure net emission of greenhouse gases by 2050. And in order to ensure economic growth, decoupled from the resource use, and to ensure that no person and no place are left behind. Can we go to the next slide, please? So green policies are policies that provide environmental parameters to reduce the environmental impact of business operations and promote sustainable development to the organization. Enhance they contribute to the sustainability performance of the demand and supply sides. Can we go next, please? So what the EU taxonomy is basically a classification system, and it establishes a list of environmentally sustainable economic activities and help the EU scale up sustainable investment and implement the European Green Deal. The EU taxonomy would provide companies, investors, and policymakers with appropriate definition for which economic activities can be considered environmentally sustainable. And this is mainly because the public sector cannot afford to provide all the resources in order to achieve these goals. But, and this is why the investors play such a key role in the European Green Deal. And they need, as a consequence, in order to convey their funds to more sustainable activities, they need to follow this EU taxonomy that will lead them to invest in what in all the societies that are considered sustainable. And in this way, it should create security for investors, protect private investors from greenwashing, help companies to become more climate friendly, mitigate market fragmentation, and help shift investments where they are most needed. Can we please move to
Okay, so this is obviously the part of the Mauro. So I will try to walk you through it, but please be considerate. So as for a historical overview, we have to keep in mind that the Europe is the leading force in the global perspective. It's also because the Europe is the place where the Industrial Revolution took the place, so we were first to pollute, so we are also first to see the consequences. Maybe some kind of a wake-up call was the Great Smoke of London in 1950s, when we just found out that we are slowly killing ourselves. So in the second half of 20th century, we can see a huge amount of treaties and conventions where the ecological legislation was discussed. As you can see, we can talk about the European Council and in Paris, and also the program action which took place after the convention. We can also see the principles of sustainable development, which are also maybe known to some of you from the local legislation. It's the prevention, reduction, and elimination, and also the principle polluter pays, which is very common in all legislations around the world. And then Mauro analyzed the individual acts and treaties, as you can see below. Maybe the interesting one is sustainable development. It's a very important term, because Europe is not saying that we are now regulating all of our production with no stress on the sustainability development, because we want to grow, but in a sustainable way. That's, I think, the important takeaway from the Treaty of Lisbon. Can we go to the next slide, please?
From now on, I'm going to talk and to explain a little bit more what actually is the EU taxonomy and who it refers to. So, as I said before, to overcome all these environmental challenges, the UN Agenda 2030 and the European Green Deal will transform EU into a modern economy. And in order to reach these goals, as I said before, a key role will be played by the financial sector. And well, what the European Commission need to do, or at least this is what this is the goal, is to reorient the private capitals in order to have more sustainable investments and a comprehensive shift in how the financial system works. This is necessary if the EU is to develop more sustainable economic growth, ensure the stability of the financial system, and foster more transparency and long-termism in the economy. The action, this is okay, sorry. So this is what the EU taxonomy is, a classification system of climate, environmentally, and socially sustainable activities, thus defining what is sustainable and which investment areas can be most effective in terms of impact and sustainability. And this is what is stated in the Regulation 2020-852. And so what makes an economic activity environmental sustainable? The European Commission has provided us with these 4 criteria. And the first one is to contribute sustainably at least one of the 6 environmental objectives laid out in the proposal. And in the next slide, we will see what these 6 environmental objects are. And these are stated in the Article 9, where there is the list of
the environmental objectives that should be followed, which are the climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, the sustainable use and protection of water and marine resources, the transition to a circular economy, pollution prevention and control, the protection and restoration of biodiversity and ecosystems. So in the next. And this regulation applies to, these measures must be adopted by member states or by the union states set out requirements for financial market participants or issuers in respect of financial products or corporate bonds that are made available as environmentally sustainable. Also, it applies to financial markets, and lastly, undertaking which are subject to the obligation to publish a non-financial statement or a consolidated non-financial statement pursuant to Article 19A or Article 29 of the Directive 2013/34 EU. No, sorry, previous one. And well, Mateusz will.
Okay, I think one of the slides disappeared, but okay, it's okay. We can. I will more focus on the the next slide. Yeah, this one, because that's the like subjects who are mostly influenced by the taxonomy. I first mention again that the European Union is the first one to like undertake those steps. So we are leading the way, but we are also learning along the way, because we are not entirely sure what the future is going to be, what the backlash from the public. It's very uncertain what the future is. Also, when we keep in mind that the situation on the environmental scale is changing so fast. But the taxonomy is the language to use when we sit around the table and we discuss the green politics. We have to know what do we mean by green, and that's why we taxonomy or pass the taxonomy to get this common language. But that you are not interested in like taxonomy. I don't know, like how does it like what does it mean for me? So we try. I will try to like present you what we say to our clients. Why is it important for them, and generally for business owners as general, because the taxonomy is divided to the business activities respectively. We can talk about transportation, also, for example, storage and energy sector. You know, but for us in urban development, it's definitely the most interesting part is buildings, construction works, and also the market of the real estate market. When you buying and selling buildings, that applies to you too. So the chunk of real estate market is very heavily under influence of taxonomy, and that's what we need to translate to our clients, because they are as confused as you are. Like, what is taxonomy and why should I care? As we are here described, yeah, that's the long text that says nothing. So I will try to translate it for you. The first one is not so relevant for clients, because the business owners, because it means that only the environmentally sustainable bonds are affected by this. So green bonds, as you maybe know them, but that's not the store on the street who issues green bonds, so we'll skip that. So financial market participants who offer financial products. Oh, that's a very important one, because that's basically every bank and every institutional investor in the sector. That's a huge part of the financing that construction companies get for their projects, because every construction, I don't know if I can say every, maybe you will find some in Asia, for example, but every European construction company builds for money borrowed from banks. So all banks will look into the taxonomy and say, oh, you are not green company and you are not building green houses, and we have to prepare the construction companies for that. We have to tell them that they will someday be judged by the taxonomy. And the last one is everybody basically who does non-financial reporting. That is reporting based around ESG, European Sustainability Governance, which is also concerned about like maybe more aspects than only ecological. It also talks about the reporting. Also talks about like how you treat your employees and such. And that's why the reporting is focused around how many employees do you have, and this will apply to more and more employers on the market, because this group is going to grow large and large to apply taxonomy on the larger and larger amount of employers on the market. And final question, why should I care when I know I'm one of these subjects? Because the future legislation in ecological sector will always be written to apply with the taxonomy terms, because whenever the future legislation will talk about something what is sustainable activity, it will mean that that the sustainable activity should be sustainable under taxonomy, which is interesting from regulation perspective. When the taxation or other regulation come from the government, it will use the language of taxonomy. Also, it's important to mention the regular cash flow, short money, because of rentals in the construction or real estate market, and customers in general will now know that you are cheating and you are not green, as you said before, because they will see it in the reporting you will have to post. So the short money rentals or even sales can be affected by this, because you will no longer you will now will have to be transparent about what are you doing. And also, as I said, the financial institutions will look at those definitions, which mean that the construction companies may get into trouble with financing, because now the institutional financial institutions will not be that easy to go to finance something which is not considered sustainable, because they don't want to be connected with it. And also the government will judge you, under the terms of the taxonomy, which will apply the pressure on the construction companies. And that's the goal of taxonomy, to find ways to apply the pressure. That's the last point I have, that we have a private pressure and public pressure on the construction companies, and that's why you should care as business owners or lawyers who want to offer the services to your clients.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Now I'm opening the Q&A session. So please, if you like to ask about something, do it now. And there will be also tomorrow one more opportunity at the panel discussion, I think.
I have a question to the last group, or maybe to everyone. How would you prefer? How do you know how your countries implement the environmental directives? Because in Poland we have a lot of new environmental law, and also have a problem with, for example, carbon footprints and like carbon companies. Could you tell some about it, about the implementation of the directive of maybe the environmental law in our country, like a little bit short about it?
Okay, so from for our group, I can say that taxonomy applies directly. So we have translation of the taxonomy, and since it's language, it applies directly, and there is no need for other local or regional legislation. It's just for future legislations also taken on the grounds of EU.
Thank you. I have a question for the second group regarding the housing crisis. I'm sorry. I was trying to pay attention to the solutions that you guys offered, like the rent control and the Airbnb rules. But I was missing one point, which I think, for me, I think is really important, and it is lack of supply on the market. Because I feel like what is driving the prices of the apartments so high is there's not enough of them, I guess. So is there any stance for you guys? Do you think that this is a problem too, or do you think that that does not affect the prices?
Oh yeah, that for sure is a problem, but when you're building new apartments, you also have to make sure that the new apartments that are being built are still affordable, because there is new apartment construction, and close to where I live in Prague, they are making a lot of new apartments, but they're apartments for the upper middle classes or even the higher classes. So like, and when you look at it that way, it doesn't even matter if they're building them, because they're not building them for the people that are in need of the apartments. They're just building them. People make money, and the rich people can buy the apartments, but it doesn't really help the population that needs the help.
Martin also would like to ask the questions in the front of the audience.
Yeah, I have maybe a question for everyone, because in my notes is that there is crisis of everything. So we are in crisis, environmental crisis, then housing crisis, then transportation is terrible and everything terrible. Like look around, we are in developed countries, and so we are very, very rich, and our cities are one of the richest regions in the world. So be realistic. Yeah. So and then the reason, and then the measure how you can then fight against all this crisis is public sector. And I live part of my life in very, let's say, public sector policy, and everything was under the state control, and especially housing. It's quite interesting, and we were in waiting list in my family some 20 years, and nobody gave us apartment. Yeah. So I'm not sure whether state sector or public sector at all is good, let's say, government or good manager to produce and then take care about housing. So compare the history. So there are also historians. So only comments for you.
Okay, thank you. And one more question from Katarzyna.
I mean, the issue with Milan about squatting, I'm gonna stand up like Mussolini so you can see me. Italiani. So, the issue with squatting in Italy, let's say, started from after 1968, because, as I said, the Communist Party answer to the Christian democracy, let's say, plan for social housing wasn't really what people considered as sufficient. So, particularly these younger groups of extreme left found the way to give an answer through squatting and the rent strikes. Rent strikes basically were we're not going to pay for the rent, and well, squatting, you know. And the issue is that squatting is still relevant in Milan because the social housing situation is that sometimes well, every year there are new houses which are destined for social housing, but at the same time there is this waiting list of 30,000 people. And if there are 65,000, and plus there are 65,000 already apartments which are destined for social housing. But every year there are, let's say, in the last decade we had every year 2,000 new apartments for social housing. However, 1 out of 3 of these social housing apartments was not assigned for some reasons which go back to the, let's say, dichotomy between municipalities and region and different government, let's say, decisions. So people, when they see that there is a full house that's ready and new for social housing, but the government doesn't give it to anyone because the, let's say, mechanism for the requests certain requirements, but still doesn't give it, that's what happens. People just go and occupy the house, the apartments. However, in Milan, the situation is that police is coming more and more often for evictions, and this creates even more social tension. And the solution should be that things get solved from a central point of view, and we somehow arrive to a solution. But I mean, I don't want to do the communist, but there's also an issue with the real estate agencies in Milan, and if it's really, how is it really, let's say, good for certain groups that the social housing issue finally finds a solution? Is it really what certain groups want? I'm not sure. And that's my communist moment.
Okay, thank you very much. One last question from Érine, I suppose, because we have to do some move of these items here. So please, short question, short answer.
Okay. Yeah. I had a question for groups 1 and 2, I guess, the 2 of them. So group 1, you told us about gentrification and the fact that it could be understood as external. But I think from one point of view, like, could we say that it's also internal because it's actually like people starting to buying houses in districts that were not inhabited by that class of people. So for example, artists at first, and then like they are pioneers kind of, and it's followed by regulations and law and real estate. So like it's an international movement coming from the people. And according to that, linking with the rent control of group 2, so is rent control, okay, I don't know how to say it, I'm sorry, I'm getting lost. Yes, rent control can be used to prevent or increase gentrification according to what the government wants, basically. So yeah, can you, I think it was you were talking about gentrification, right? Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, yeah. So if we can understand gentrification as internal and not only external, then can rent control create more gentrification, and then the rent will increase, which is bad according to what you all said, basically. Or if the rent control is not used to prevent gentrification, then like what would it be? Like, do you get my point? I mean, okay.
Is anybody from group 1 want to weigh in on the internal?
Okay, well, I'm sad. Okay. Thank you.
Is unconstitutional according to German constitutional law. So rent control is basically bullshit. I mean,
you mean Prague and Milan?
No, I mean that the the constitutional court of one of the members of the European Union deemed it unconstitutional, and the Czech constitutional court a lot of times copies the resolutions or the judgments of German constitutional court based on
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for questions and answers. But we really have to finish this part, and I'd like to invite you for a short guided trip to our library building with Marlena Baran, who will be a leader of this trip. It will be very fast and short, and after that we will come here for coffee break with more food. So here we will meet in this audience at 7 o'clock.